Hi everyone, we're back, and this is the Artis with Ivy Reiss. Today, my guest is Laurence Hutchman. He's a prolific author. He has published 10 books of poetry, including 2 nonfiction books. His book, In the Writer's Words, interviewed 8 of Canada's greatest literary individuals, including Al Purdy, P.K. Page, and others. His latest book, The House of Shifting Time, is what we'll be talking about today. He has garnered numerous awards, including the Alden Nolan Award for Excellence. Last year, in 2018, he was named Poet Laureate of Emory, shortly after the release of his 2 Maps of Emery non-fiction historical poetry book. And Stephen Morrissey has described Laurence as one who can transform the mundane experience into the joy of real poetry. And Bruce Mayer has called Laurence one of Canada's most compelling and accomplished poets. Please welcome Laurence Hutchman. Hi, Laurence. How are you?
Hi, Ivy. It's great to be here.
Yeah. You know, originally you were born in Ireland, and you came here when you were very young, Northern Ireland, I should say. Your mother was Dutch, and your father was Irish. And I've known you for years, and I've found a lot of your works have this thread of heritage and the past, and you have this knack of kind of adding this nonfiction feel into a lot of your poetry. Although it's not, I wouldn't call it in a confessional genre. And why is heritage so important to you?
I think because I spent some time in Europe before I came here, and people remember the past, and it made a big impression on me, coming from Northern Ireland and spending some time in Holland.
Yeah.
The imagery is so rich, the language is so original. And the landscape is it's very powerful. So you don't forget that, going to the sea with seeing your father fishing, it's like seeing some Lord of the Rings, it has that kind of richness and the texture of feeling, and same with my mother, she lived next to the royal estate in Holland, and so we visited the palace in the morning's walk. So those experiences
Have stayed with you.
Stay with me because they're really enracinated in history.
Well, what's your latest book, The House of Shifting Time, just got launched a couple months ago, and it's already garnered over 2,100 hits on LinkedIn. You're selling copies. It's amazing. 2 Maps of Emery has gone into its 2nd edition,
That's right.
Which is really incredible for any poetry edition at all. And the thing about this book, House of Shifting Time, is it explores a lot of places and kind of houses, if you will. And, it's really interesting. You take us through from, we go from Kings County to Tory Island to Emory to Oakville, even as far as Siberia.
I think houses, when I started thinking of the houses, I realized I was writing a lot of poems about houses. And it's just not only houses, places where we inhabit, the places of our personal history, places of family, but it's also places that we visit. If we think of houses as not only a noun but as a verb, to house, we can see that, for instance, a jail, which was also a museum, can be a
Kings
house.
County Jail.
A house. When I visited the pyramid, the Khafre pyramid in Egypt, that's a house of the dead. Mm-hmm. There was a destroyed house I rediscovered in Emory, and that was once a house. So houses are destroyed, but they also are preserved.
Exactly. Well, you said to me something really cool. You said it's not just the houses from which we come from, it's also a place where things are housed. And you have this knack of getting inside of things. I mean, Kings County Jail is one of the poems in here. And what inspired that?
Just the fact that it was in a jail. I thought it was very unusual to have a museum in a jail. Actually, exhibits in the prisoner's cells. You had this presence that this was once a penitentiary, but now it housed these exhibits. And what struck me was that the reality of the exhibits was much more ambiguous than that. For instance, you have these prisoners who were not prisoners, but the soldiers, before they went overseas to fight in the First World War, had these studio shots, which were very kind of manicured shots. And the soldiers had there was a kind of naive atmosphere in the shot, and there was almost a smile or some pride about this still shot. And you contrasted this with the visions, what happened to some, the biggest British military disaster in history, and Passchendaele, in which it's totally opposite. You couldn't help but be aware of the striking contrast with what the exhibit was trying to show,
Yet the
and
reality.
the reality what it was.
Was that is it the Kingston Penitentiary? Because that got closed down.
Yeah. So
But where is Kings County Jail?
that's in New Brunswick, near
Oh, okay.
Fredericton. Yes.
In case the viewers want to visit.
I think it's in Hampton.
Yeah. Okay. Because Kingston Penitentiary was also closed down.
Sure.
I think about 5
Yeah.
years ago now, and one of the most notorious penitentiaries in the architecture within.
Sure.
And I think they're gonna be opening it up if it's not already open to the public. And yeah. Well, thing is, you have the anesthesiast's wife is another interesting poem, and maybe you want to talk about that, and we'll move on to, because you have a knack of really getting to the core of people, of stories, and
Yeah, this was based on a British woman who came and lived in northern New Brunswick, very far from her own upbringing,
Yeah.
much like Susanna Moody, I think. And she followed her husband to be there. She was out of place. But she was very defiant. She was a character who put up the Union Jack, the only Union Jack in the Republic of Madawaska.
wow.
And so she was in this constant battle with her surroundings, the long winters, and with being totally surrounded by French and with her own heritage. And so I made these comparisons, being her like Sleeping Beauty, or the Fraulein weeping in the Rhineland. It was very difficult for her to deal. She said to her husband had this talent for putting people to, giving them anesthesia.
Yes.
And so she was a model for this poem. And
Well, yeah, go on.
that was just the basis for the poem. And people often find themselves at odds with their environment. And I'm interested in that kind of cultural clash between people.
Well, one line in it is really quite striking. I became Sleeping Beauty hallucinating in the Lake District, or an ever-lost Fraulein weeping in the Rhineland. Glacier mirrors reflect our aging faces.
Yes.
And it's only about 10 lines, the whole piece. But Dan, the poem Dan, now that actually hits home for you. It's based, in a couple ways, but that one is based on a gentleman you met in Edmundston.
That's right. I met him in a hospital. I was visiting the hospital and met his wife, and I realized that she was Dutch, so we started talking, and inevitably come back to the war.
Mm-hmm.
And she mentioned that her husband was involved in the war. Actually, he was imprisoned in a transit camp. I wasn't aware that transit camp was in Amersfoort, Holland. And so.
And now for our viewers, we should let them know that essentially it's a Nazi camp.
Yes, Nazi camp. And so he told me this story. And what I've had, some of my poems are about people who've gone through various battles or wars. Like I interviewed Ori Truman, who went through the Battle of El Alamein, and the battle all the way through Sicily, right up into Pisa.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan, the story of Dan was he was captured for being a criminal, right?
And they were given different colors
Right.
of.
This I found really kind of fascinating because they were labeled, and I'll just read a section.
Yeah.
They put a mark on our uniforms. Dan talking. He told me this.
Yeah.
Story. And Dan had never talked about this before.
And he just met you as a stranger.
Not even his sons. He had not even told his sons his story. And suddenly he just was moved to speak about it. He put a black mark on our uniforms a black circle if you were in the black market, an orange circle if you were in politics, a pink circle if you were gay. I got a green mark because they thought I was a criminal.
Thought being the key word.
Yeah, thought, yes. It was probably on suspicion, yes.
Yeah.
He was just picked up on the street, you know, under suspicion, and he was then sent to a camp.
Yeah, I really want to
Okay.
emphasize the aspect of how you do get to the nug of things and people. And we'll come back to Emery, so I'll talk more about how Laurence does that. But that poem hits home for you because you have another poem in the collection, House of Shifting Time, called Yellow Star. And that is about your Aunt Fenna, who was Jewish.
Yes.
And she escaped from a camp, is that right?
No, it was her father. Her father was a high school principal, and he was sent to a camp, Westerbork.
Okay.
This was the same camp that Anne Frank was, and many other Dutch Jews were put in for temporary placement before they went to Auschwitz. And he was with his friend working on the railway, and at one point the guards went looking, and so he said to his friend Garrett, let's make a break for it. This is our one chance. And they walked down the railway, and they kept walking until they reached the sea. And this journey saved his life.
He made it out.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't realize that that's the same camp Anne Frank was in, which you explain, because you do have an Anne Frank poem in
That's
this
right.
book as well. It's unbelievable, and it's 3 segments, goes through, even takes us to Warsaw, goes through many places and many travels. Now,
Incidentally, one day when my aunt came out and she put this little crinkled bag on the table, and I looked at it, I thought it was a starfish at first, and I thought, no, it's a yellow star. That was her actual
so
actual
you
star.
didn't, in a way, as a child, you didn't even know
No, I
that
didn't.
she'd been in a camp.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, but so I guess she didn't really talk about it?
No, she just said, I don't know. Any question I asked her, I said, I don't know. And I just understood. Like, several of members of her family died in Auschwitz, so it was understandable.
Yeah, I think that's an important topic to bring up, especially with the rise of populism right now, and in Europe especially. And again, your collection is really it's timely.
Yes, well, I think one of the important aspects of these poems about war is that you're not just talking about the Second World War. We're talking about things that are happening in North Korea, in China, in Libya, in Israel,
and they're not
so many
being
places.
talked about.
Yeah, and we have to be aware that people are labeled, as the Nazis during the war labeled them.
Yeah, that thought actually came to me the other night because there are worker camps, and if you commit even a small crime
That's right.
in another country such as China, you're labor in a camp for maybe the rest of your life.
That's true.
And but we don't want to keep it too heavy now. Couple things. So, Drinking with Noah in the Snowdon Brasserie is really an Oakville poem, you told me. And tell me about how. And also the house is going away, because you do live in Oakville with your wife, Eva Kolach, who's also an artist.
Yeah.
And how is it an Oakville poem?
Well, the poem about Noah is really a Montreal poem. When I met him when I was living there in the 80s. The poem "A House is Going Away," I'm always attracted to the vestiges of the past. The things that are they're so powerful when they're there. When we see a barn in the middle of a series of factories surrounded by a corral, it's almost like it's in prison. But there's something very powerful that it evokes, because it's the whole history of that place, of the farmers. And Emery talks about this, and I talk about this in Emery, in which the farmers, they weren't just farmers. I discovered in this book that the settlers came with Governor Simcoe. They knew Governor Simcoe, and they were involved. And the farmers told me these stories about one man fighting in the rebellion of 1837. Several people went through World War I. Suffered. One of the Devons suffered a gas attack. World War II with Ori Truman. Ori Truman, one of his friends.
And you talk about Ori Truman in Emery.
That's right.
But you had something to say about how, about green spaces. And you did tell me something, we build these suburbs and we don't leave enough green space, but Holland has a way of preserving
when you fly over England or you fly over Germany or Holland, when you look down, you don't just see suburbs. You see canals. You see open spaces. You see that the cities actually can breathe, and even between houses there is space. Not always in Holland, of course, but there's a sense that there's a planning going on. There's some kind of plan going on. That things
keep
are
it
not
sacred
determined only by money, by investment, by real estate, because that's where the power is right now. And even the architects they do these beautiful houses, but they're too close together, and there's no kind of open ponds. There's no green space. There are a few parks down in Oakville in the downtown, but so much of it now, it's a really awful trend. It's like a factory of suburbs. How is this going to affect the children? I grew up in a place with access to the farms, and it was almost like a Wordsworthian space at that point.
Well, in the last 15 years, a lot of green space in Oakville has disappeared. And
So I wrote this poem because it was a house, and I realized it was all going away.
yeah.
It was like on stilts, like a boat. It was going to be shipped somewhere else.
Well, I would like to show the audience two maps of Emery. This came out, I believe, 2017.
That's correct.
And Emery is actually like the old Weston Road area of Toronto.
Weston and Finch, yeah.
Weston and Finch. And you grew up there.
Yes.
And you did over 60, 70 hours worth of interviews with real people and pulled together this essentially a story, but it's all in poetry. And there was one quote in here that I really loved, but it captures how places... it's in two maps. For years I've been away. Perhaps for years I've been away, yet their houses have haunted my dreams.
Well, I must admit, many of my poems and my books come from dreams. I mean, it's the ideas, not the poem. But so several books came from a
Even
dream.
some of your paintings. The cover is a painting. you've
Yes,
done, yes.
that's right. This is from Two Maps of Emery. For years I've been away, yet their houses have haunted my dreams. The farmers' voices said, turn from your work, return to a place that is no longer there. I dream of a clear river that flows through Emery, of a tree that grows through school windows. Journey, say the voices, to find your history. Here is the place you're looking for.
That's so cool. And then you went and you looked for the cosmetician,
Oh, Elizabeth Arden.
Elizabeth Arden. And you talk about, there's a couple poems in this book and one in this, and where you went searching for a log cabin?
Yeah, I found
And-
a place, and I found some remnants of an old window frames, and the place was in a clearing, so I thought that's where Elizabeth Arden, whose real name was Florence Nightingale Graham, and she was born in Woodbridge, and she changed her name. She went to Tennyson for the Arden part, and she became one of the leading cosmeticians of the 20th century, and she had these humble beginnings in
Emery, I
Emery.
think.
In fact, she went to school on a horse and carriage, and she went to the Emery Public School, the one that I've was in several times. Was
Yeah.
still
And they
existing.
have your artwork up in the library now, I believe.
Yeah, my painting is in the library at Emery Collegiate. Yeah.
But now you almost got thrown into prison, or almost got arrested for trying to find her log cabin in Pioneer Village. Or tell us that story.
Yeah, I went to interview Jane Deal, who was whose land ultimately became Pioneer Village, and she gave me a tour of Pioneer Village. And I learned so much about her. And there's a poem about her in the book too. And she pointed out where Elizabeth Arden's cabin was.
Right.
And so I decided to go there, and I had to climb about a 9-foot fence to get in. And I spent 2 hours going around digging in the earth and finding these old frames and various other remnants from the house or the area around that. And suddenly it was very cold. It was getting dark, and the snow was beginning to fall heavily. And suddenly I saw these candy-colored police lights. Mm-hmm. And boys came out of the darkness saying, "Put your hands up and don't move." And I'm thinking, what have I done? So anyway, they approached me and they said, we had a report that you're looking for, we're looking for someone, implying that I'm looking for a dead person,
Ooh,
right?
yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, I'm looking for someone who the story behind her. So I thought they would know who Elizabeth Arden was. I'm looking for the log cabin of Elizabeth Arden, and they didn't know who she was. So they had to go and check them, go back to their car and put a report through on me, and then I was cleared.
So, well, if I ever go, I used to go to Pioneer Village on school trips. If I ever go back to Pioneer Village,
Yes.
which is in North Toronto near Emery, I'm going to ask around. And for anyone who likes to know, a piece of red tanzim glass is the poem in here about Elizabeth Arden. And 2 Maps of Emery, you'll find her name in the poems. And even in this book, you go to abandoned churches, you talk to people. It's unbelievable. There's a reason you're named Poet Laureate for this book.
Thank you.
And I really want to encourage everyone to check it out. It's in its 2nd edition. The contact info will be up on the screen in a minute. But just a couple more things. For you, you've said to me, poetry is a way of getting to the past, of evoking the past. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to talk about the past because forgetting the past is never helpful. If we could all remember our histories, perhaps certain same mistakes wouldn't be repeated.
Our past is right before us. It's always there. There are always tablets or things which point to the past. It's not the past has its own presence. And I think when I saw the tablet in the schoolyard with the names of soldiers on it who died in overseas in the First World War, and I realized that we don't know our past. In fact, the name on the monument, I used to crack my chestnuts on the original
Growing
place.
up in Emery, you have that in a poem.
And I looked at it and I'm thinking, yeah, this man, I found out later, that's exactly where he lived, where the school was. In fact, the Farmer's Road is the same road that the school driveway is now. So the past is and present. And we sat before that and put the wreath before him and said, lest we forget. But the thing is, we often don't forget. It takes commitment to understand our past. Our past informs us. It permeates us. And by probing it, we find it unlocks us. What really interests me, I think, is the fact that we have our personal histories, and then we have this long history. It was important, once I realized that there was a history of Emery that went back to Governor Simcoe, that I explored this area. And now when I go there, it's like there's a whole little country there with a history to it, And I'm part of that history, and my friends are part of that history, and the teachers are part of it. When I was looking down Emery Hill, that's where I learned Homer and Virgil and Shakespeare. Music Be the Football. It was in the screen of that whole place where we grew up. So that the past and the present were coexisting, and the past feeds the present.
And the thing you said about this book, about Emery, the other day is, it's kind of like what shocked you, what caused you to want to investigate those people was that there were all these small little houses that made this community on the outskirts of Toronto, and it just had almost all of them disappeared, were obliterated.
Yeah.
And that's what caused you to
Well,
do the
it's almost like
investigative writing.
the real estate wars.
Yeah.
I remember one day I was about 12 years old. I looked out at where the village was, and I saw 5 yellow bulldozers plowing the fields. The forest was gone, and everything was replaced by factories.
Yeah.
And we played in those abandoned houses. In fact, one place where the school was, my friend Les Kelly and I were once chased off by the farmer with a gun.
Yeah. That's a story in here as well.
Yeah, and when he left his house, we creeped back into the house. We were afraid he was still there, but we went in, and it was like all the things were still there. It was very bizarre. It was like a studio set. And in the middle of the room was this box, like a treasure box, right? Almost. And I thought, wow. We went over it, we opened it, and it was just all these newspapers from the Second World War about Stalingrad and about Roosevelt and Churchill. And
Like
Okinawa.
real authentic letters.
Authentic papers, right? And so I think that the school and the church, they're all together. They weren't separate from me.
Yeah.
The
Well,
memories.
you have said that poetry is a way of recuperating the past, and I think that you do that.
Thank you.
You bring it to the forefront in a medium that is really important.
Yeah.
And as As Simon Armitage has said and Brandon Pitts quoted in, poetry should not be frivolous. But your stuff is also, it's funny, it's readable, it's incredible. Everyone, Laurence Hutchman's contact info is going up on the screen. You can order both books, The House of Shifting Time and also Two Maps of Emery from Black Moss Press. Please find Laurence on Facebook at Laurence Hutchman and contact him, follow him, like his page, and find out how to get a signed copy. He also has some upcoming readings, and perhaps you would like to tell the viewers. I have it on hand here.
Yeah, there's one at the Art Bar on August 20th.
Yeah, and June 11th, he will be live on air at 89.5 CIUT FM with Valentino Essenza at 10 p.m. You can live stream it. CIUT FM has also started logging their live streams, so you can also find past podcasts. And he will be reading also at the Transact Club this summer, so that's why you should stay tuned to the Facebook page. All that info's on the screen. Thank you so much for tuning in, and it was a pleasure to have you tune in. It was a pleasure to have you here, Laurence.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you so much. And if you'd like to find out more about In the Writers' Words, that is also available through Guernica Editions. And many of the greats that he interviewed here have passed on, and this is really something for the history books.
Thank you.
And one more thing, the Artis did a fabulous interview on, Artis #1 on Two Maps of Emery. You can find it in Chapters Indigo and Oakville, and also in the 905 libraries. Visit theartismagazine.com to find out where you can get it. Thanks again for tuning in. Laurence, thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you again.
Pleasure.
Yeah. And just to give you a taste of some of Laurence's poetry, he's going to do two poems for us. A Night Expressed to the Maritimes in the House of Shifting Time, and it's dedicated to Al Moritz.
Night Express to the Maritimes. Through city streets, the bus launches into the storm. Already the terrain outside is unfriendly. The air monsoon wild. People peer into night's mirror, move restlessly on worn upholstery. A young woman clasps her cell phone as her lover's words break into static, her voice rising. "You better not have a girl in our bedroom." A man looks out into the night, remembers his friend bleeding on the cobblestones. Pile of pills spilled around him, sirens following the night. Crazy candy-colored cop car lights fracturing the air, breaking through mist. The Filipino woman beside me, grasping the seat as if it were a reef, speaks about visiting her husband. "Who are you? Are you my mother?" A young couple smile, talk how they rode the weekends high, wave after wave of desire. Slowly, the rain trickles, stops, a mist hangs on the highway shoulder. On large trees gathered together, the gray sky is still, waiting for the dawn.
Thank you. And the next piece you're going to read is Yellow Star, which we spoke about a moment ago in the interview, and it's about your Aunt Fenna's family.
Yeah. Yellow Star. Sitting across the table, I noticed the cellophane package, the crinkled plastic not quite clear, containing something almost alive. I took it out of the bag. It was a Star of David, which belonged to my Aunt Fenna's father, identifying him as a Jew. He was sent to a work camp for resettlement.
Now, at the risk of giving people too much, and we want them wanting more, but you know what? I think you should do the one other piece. It's the last piece in House of Shifting Time. Once again, everyone, you can order it through Black Moss Press, and it's called We Are Always Searching for a Place.
We are always searching for a place. We keep going back to the beginning, to the larger element, as if origins could explain the matrix of our being, the source of stars, the eagle's nest, the nuclei dance. We keep searching for the stories, the intricate rhythms of ancestors' songs, looking beyond the constellations. The myths are being played out until we find the strands of thought. Love in the voice of many-tongued words in the midst of chaos, trying not to forget the place where we grew up. Carrying our ancestors' original vision, clarity of their maps within our genes, encoded now, we grasp.
That poem proves poetry is a way of recuperating the past.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us, Laurence. Everyone, check him out, the Free Times Cafe on June 20th. Tune in to CIUT FM, and thank you again. We'll see you soon.